My name is Hassan Habib. I've been in the tech industry now for over 25 years, since 1997. It's quite a while. And I had the opportunity to work with major companies here in the U.S. and outside. Companies like Microsoft. I worked with DuPont, Pioneer, John Deere, and now I'm trying to kind of help the .NET community kind of merge into this age of AI by developing tools, engaging in live sessions, and developing systems, and overall kind of help engineers evolve and get that kind of skill set and get the opportunity to learn about AI and leveraging AI in the easiest and simplest way possible. I know it's not an easy topic, especially as a developer. Like anybody can go to Chat GPT and just type some things, and it's great, it's cool, it has answers and all everything like that, and there are now all these plugins. But when it comes down to software engineers, we have very different kind of needs, when it comes to integrating AI into our systems. For instance, how would you effectively and efficiently integrate AI into a system that people are using today, into an architecture that you're building today? What are the things that you need to be aware of? What are the risks that you need to be aware of when it comes to developing AI into your architecture? There's so many things that I've been kind of having a lot of conversation with, working with some people, in the industry to kind of develop systems that are useful. And I have a really cool POC for all of you today to kind of take a look at and see, how AI can be very, very, very helpful in this particular matter. So first of all, before anything and everything, I'll be sharing my screen here a lot. Carter, I'm assuming I have the powers to share screens and stuff. Yeah.
Yes, you should be good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So for just first and foremost, there is, about 3 months ago, I started an open source project for the .NET community. It's open source, it's standard compliant, that basically offers a library, a .NET library that is free, open source. They can go see the code. It's called Standard.AI, and I'm going to share my screen here real quick. And what this library does is that it allows you to basically interact with OpenAI Chat GPT, right? The library, like I said, it's a baby library. It's a 2 months old library, but it's already, catching up, in the NuGet.org. The community has been contributing. And I really just wanted something simple for any .NET developer out there to be able to kind of build things on top of AI. So I'm going to be using this today just to show you what it's like to kind of interact with this system, right? The library as well is very much so test driven, has integration and unit tests. There's a lot of lessons to be learned there when you're developing libraries like that. But more importantly, every session that we like, every single line of code that we have written in this library is recorded in live sessions. So there's about 37 sessions of these that vary between an hour to 2 hours to 3 hours. It shows you literally from day one, like, or day zero, I guess. There's from an idea, all the way up to producing a fully formed library that you can use, all the test driven development approaches. What did we do with integration tests, problems that we had to solve? And as we are developing this library, you can also see the engagement with the community, and how people are asking questions about, particular issues, how we disagree and agree on things. Everything related to this library is there. So I'm going to be building on top of that. But forget about the library for a second. Let's just talk about AI in general. So if unless you haven't been on social media or been offline doing a tech detox or something like that for like the last 12 months or so, you must at some point in time have heard about Chat GPT or OpenAI in general, right? And how the tech world and even beyond, everything has changed since then. A lot of people are trying to integrate this in. You've heard about image generated AI. I've just seen a TV show in Japan where the presenter is fully generated with AI. The voice, the pictures, everything is generated. It's starting to kind of take shape and starting to be involved in so many different aspects in our lives. And if you like technology, you like software engineering and all that, of course you have to know about this and kind of have a little bit of knowledge and how you kind of work with it, because that's going to be the future moving onwards in developing any systems. So there's this thing, this smart thing that just ask it questions and it goes and works with some data and basically produces answers and results. How does it come to be? Where, like, if you were to go and build your own AI model today, what would that take? Well, when people are developing AI models, they basically have to gather a whole lot of data. So it starts with data, right? And that data at some point in time, you have to do a cutover and basically say, okay, we're gonna train our model on that piece of data. Okay, so that data has to go through some algorithm, right? And this algorithm will do the training. You will see people saying things about ChatGPT 3 or GPT 4 or 3.5. These are all kind of algorithms and models. So there's an algorithm that you have to go through here. And then once you add the data to the algorithm and do the training, what comes out from the other side is this model that you are basically working with and interacting with. So this is the model, right? And these models can be very different. You have all kinds of different models that are trained to do particular tasks. So there are some models that are more focused on one thing versus the other. Models are better in, it's all about the consumption of data and working with the data, right? But the one thing that you have to understand as someone who's developing software and want to integrate AI into your software, that at some point in time, that data, people have to put a cutover, a freeze, right? So they can train basically the model on that data and be able to give you a model that you can work with, right? So like if you go to ChatGPT today and ask it questions about, for instance, Queen Elizabeth, right? And you say, okay, Queen Elizabeth passed away. I'll be like, well, I'm sorry, but my data, as far as I know, my data stopped in 2021 or something like that. So just be aware that when you're integrating AI into your system, you have to know how old your model is. It helps a lot, based on what you're trying to accomplish, right? And it really differs from one business to another, right? So keep that in mind. But more importantly, than all of this is basically, okay, what are we going to do with this model? How can you integrate this in your business today? Like, let's say, for instance, the classic ASP.NET or .NET application, probably you have data and you have an API, and the API calls the data, and you have this is the simplest form I can think of, and something that everyone can basically connect with and relate to. You have an API in here. The API reads your data, and then you have a UI sitting in front of this, and basically the UI is working with your API to get the data and process that data. That's classic 90 to 99, maybe 95% of the applications out there, whether they're enterprise, mobile, desktop, small or mid-sized businesses, it doesn't matter. Classic, any application out there, there's some data or maybe an API you're calling, and then there is UI and there's an API sitting in between, right? Okay, I want to put AI in front of this. One big lesson that I learned in the last, few months when I've been learning and researching about AI is that you can't put AI yet between two systems that are talking to each other. Like if you go and put AI in here, in between these two systems, that's a very risky and very dangerous approach to take. Why is that? Because AI can give you different answers for the same question. Like you could ask the exact same question and AI will still give you completely different answers, if not hallucinate and try to think, oh, why are you asking me the same question? Maybe you didn't like the first one. I'm going to go and try again, especially if you're doing this in context. Big problem and big issue that I've seen a lot of engineers try to do today is to put AI between two systems. When systems are trying to kind of integrate with each other, there has to be some common language and a common format like JSON or XML or whatever, or protobuffer, to kind of have these two systems talk to each other. And they have to agree on certain format and certain set of data that you have to work with. If you take that approach today, AI is not mature enough, or the models are out there, the popular models are out there, is not mature enough to allow that seamless communication. You're going to get different answers every single time. Some of you know that I work a lot with OData. We tried some of that with OData, and sometimes you're going to get completely different answers no matter how much research. It's not the same input, you're not going to get the same output, right? So just keep that in mind. But AI can be extremely, extremely useful if you put it between a system and a user interface where the user is the person that's going to have to interact with this AI. Why is that? Because there is a level of kind of, let's say, forgiveness from the user side to go and say, oh, yeah, well, this is a somewhat a good answer. I could live with that, right? So if you have a UI or something like that, and you have, let's say, a set of data and you're querying a set of data, and people are basically just passing in natural queries. So they're not really writing a specific standardized or a formatted a set of inputs that go through the API, and they're just kind of using natural language or interacting with voice or images or whatever the case may be. There will be this, you have this kind of wiggle room or grace, kind of a zone where the person that's using the system is able to interact with it and kind of understand why the answer is not precise and not quite where they want to be. So there's that part. And this is something that you can use today, and I'm going to show you how you can use this today. So this is your user here. So what is the most common thing that you'll see a lot of engineers do when they're interacting with a set of data? Okay, that you must have at some point in time, if you use Syncfusion, there is this, my favorite thing in Syncfusion is the Syncfusion grid, right? You put the grid, you see all the data being listed in there, and I'm going to show you here, if you're not familiar with the tool, and I really like this tool a lot, it kind of helped me in so many different ways. Let me just show you the SF grid in here, and let me show you how I use that in real life. So let's go back here. So you have this grid here, right? And the grid basically has a ton of options, right? Actually, I'm going to show you the live demo because it's much better demo. Let's just do this. Let's go here. Here, probably a lot of us, is not, if not all of us, at some point in time basically went to develop a grid for some business. If you're building an enterprise application, 100% you'll be building grids where people kind of list the data and all that kind of stuff, which is great, right? It helps. People are filtering, they can click on filters, they can search, whether the value starts with and ends with, and the designation and the mail and all that. We already do that. This is so classic, software development that anybody must have had to do at some point in time. Okay, so grids are cool, right? But what if we took that filtering capability to the next level and we put AI in between the user interface and your system? So when you're working with your data, people don't have to be controlled or limited by only the controls that you're offering on the UI, but rather have an open field where people can just, dictate what kind of filtering they want to do, and the AI will basically translate that into SQL or link expressions that can actually pull that data. In other words, imagine a world where instead of you talking like to the AI like this, your UI is basically going and saying, "Okay, I want to talk to an API, but what I'm really sending to my classic API is basically a call to AI, OpenAI, and then I'm taking whatever that response that's coming from OpenAI and putting it into my database." Okay, so let's say, for instance, you're basically saying, hey, give me all the students you have in a database. You didn't really specify any format. OpenAI here will take that query and turn it into SQL and then execute that SQL on your database and then give you back the results in a dynamic way. Why is that important? Because 90% of the people that want to query your data today are not tech savvies. They're not SQL people. They're not C Sharp entity framework people. They're mostly decision makers, marketers, researchers who just have completely different interest in consuming the data than knowing how to query that data and all that kind of stuff, right? So if you give these people the ability to go and just query the data with a natural language, you're basically serving or enabling a vast majority of people to be able to work with your data without having to be limited with certain controls and certain queries and all that. What does this look like in real life? So I went ahead and built like a demo database here for everybody. Let me Let me minimize the screen here. Just Carter, tell me if the text is visible, because I always worry about the. So if I go and do something like this, Like if I type a query like this, is this text visible? If I say select all from students, does this look visible from your side?
Yeah, that's
It
clear
looks
to
good.
me. And it's like
What?
I think I see some people commenting in the chat also saying it looks good to them.
Okay, looks good. Okay, perfect, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so imagine this. This is your classic kind of thing. You have a query. You're basically saying, give me all the students, and maybe you'll go here and say inner join with, student assignments. So this is student assignments on student.id equals student assignment dot student ID, and boom, before you know it, you have all the students that have assignments attached to them, right? Your typical data consumer have no idea what this is. They might kind of figure it out, but when it gets a little bit more complicated, doing things like where, the name of, student name or something like that is a, let's say name, like so student.name like this, right? Like, right? And you're looking for maybe someone that has K in their name, right? And then there's the uppercase, lowercase, and all that kind of stuff. You start losing your audience, right? And now you are compelled as a software engineer to go back to your controls and go back to your APIs and try to offer these kind of controls to the end user who is not familiar with SQL. Instead of doing that, I basically built a simple application, and it's open source. You can go and I'll share the link with Carter so you can take a look at it. The application, what it really does, the architecture that I just showed you a second ago. So I'm gonna run here a quick query just to show you how it looks like. If you just bear with me 1 second. Here is my console application. This application literally is doing that. It's basically going and saying, so this is my console application. And what this application is doing now is that I can go here and say, give me, without yelling, give me all the students you have in the database. And this is not a preset command. Like I have no idea what this thing is going to give me back, right? It's basically taking this and sending it all the way to OpenAI. And OpenAI is converting this into SQL and then executing that on SQL, and then giving me back a dynamic list of results. So let's just try something else. Let's just say, give me all students that have the letter in their names. And there's no guarantee this is going to work because it's OpenAI, right? Like, see how it works. Like, it's fantastic, right? So I'm just basically passing natural language that anybody knows and taking that AI component and letting it convert that data to me and give me back the set of results, right? Let's do one more just to kind of proof of concepts, and then we'll move on to something else. Give me all students and the titles of their or the subjects of their assignments. There you go. So it says Naveen has a math assignment and Hassan has a history assignment. If you look at the code that's sitting behind this, literally, I'm just going and saying, hey, take uh, my existing. Let me go back here. Yeah, take my existing query, right? So I'm passing in here a key and a server a connection string, and I'm basically saying run AI query. And in this run AI query, I'm using this library to basically go and say, okay, teach me about every schema in that database, and then take that natural query and send it to OpenAI. This is the library that I just told you about. And then give me back the SQL, and then go ahead and use Dapper to execute this here is get descriptive, and then take in that SQL here and use Dapper to execute that query and then give me back the results, right? It's really quick and dirty. It's just a proof of concept. I promise you I build much cleaner systems than this, but it's just kind of to convey the picture of what is really needed to be done. And don't worry about the key for the OpenAI stuff. A lot of these things kind of get rotated, so it's not a problem there. So going back to this architecture, this is really what happened. I basically used the console application, so it's just a command line, right? And I'm basically sending a request through this library that I built to OpenAI and SQL. So it goes to OpenAI, converts that, and turns into SQL. Imagine the amount of possibilities that you can get outside of just simply just adding this one component, how much options of filtering and querying and ordering that you're offering your end users with just a simple kind of AI piece integration. I'll take a breather here to see if anyone has any questions, and then we'll talk a little bit more about risks and opportunities and all that. At the chat here. Yeah, okay. Questions, comments, concerns? Okay. All right. Okay, so this is something that you can use today. Literally, you can work with something like this today. Okay, I see. Is there a GitHub link for this project? Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the reminder. Yeah, so if I go into, let me kind of show you here real quick the GitHub link for this. So there's two kind of efforts here that we're talking about. There is the POC. Let's go to the POC of this, which is basically in, let's go here, repositories. And there's Entity Intelligence POC, right? And I'm going to share the link here in the chat just so people kind of get the chance. There's that, there's that guy here. Okay. But then I'm basically taking this project just like OpenAI and turning it into a library. So you will see new live sessions that I have started literally just this week to basically go and say, okay, let's standardize this. Let's build this as a solid library that people will be able to use. So I'm going to put that in there as well. You know, you want to keep an eye on the daily or nightly sessions that we have in the Pacific Standard Time to kind of see how we're going to kind of implement something like this. There's a whole list. I think we have about 3 sessions so far, but you know, every day, and you know, if you want to be a part of this effort, it really just there's open issues. You pick up the open issue, you interact with the standard communities, you ask questions, and you learn about how to engage in a project like this. Okay, I see a question here that says it's cool, but it seems very risky. Absolutely, that's part of um, the deal that we're working with here. So if you're working with AI, you have to be aware that there's this phenomena. There's this thing that is very common and popular with people that are working with AI, which is they call AI hallucinations. The problem with AI hallucinations is that it will offer you an answer that looks extremely real. It looks real. It looks legitimate. But if you dig a little bit into the details of it, you're going to find out that, you know, the answer is completely fictitious, right? So this is one risk that you have to be aware of, right? So you have to be extremely precise. Like, look, when I'm talking to the AI component, I had to kind of basically go and say, respond only with code. Don't try to explain anything. Here's the sequel of the following table. So here's the exact tables. I want you to translate this request within these tables to that particular query. So you have to be extremely precise when it comes to how you're working with these pieces, because if you're not, AI will make assumptions, and when it makes assumptions, it hallucinates, right? It starts giving you it tries to fill in the gaps there, and it tries to kind of do the pieces that you haven't provided. It has to kind of make sense to itself, you know, how these nodes of data and how these pieces are connected to each other. So there's that risk that you have to take. So you have to be extremely precise, and even with your preciseness, you have to also understand there's another risk, especially when you're working with OpenAI specifically as an online service, is that you are limited by the number of tokens, right? So you can't just feed it anything you want. You can't be limited based on the model that you're working with to 4,000 tokens or 4,050 tokens and stuff like that. So it gets very tricky when it comes to optimization and using that data, you know, effectively. But there's also the effort and the idea about using offline models, right? Which is another effort that I'm trying to start. So .NET developers, you know, I want them to pull in a database, feed that database some data, it starts doing the training for you, and then it gives you back the model that you can ask questions without having to worry about the little details that are happening in there. Okay, I see a question here from Florian. So you don't give OpenAI access to your DB? No, I do not. I do not. Just the schema. That's correct. So literally, I'm basically going and saying, hey, OpenAI, assume that you have a data that has that schema. So these are all my tables. And this query basically just gives me the tables and the data types on every column in that data. And be aware, that's not private. Like just as soon as you share that data with OpenAI, you have no right to say, hey, you can't share this with anybody else because the model will take that data and train itself on it. So just be aware if you're sharing something, it's not private anymore. The joke goes around is that some people use OpenAI to generate passwords. So that's a very interesting kind of comical thing to talk about. But yeah, so you're not really sharing the data. Could you write a query that makes it ignore use only code, etc.? You mean like the query that is being passed in? You want to probably explain this a little bit because if you mean me taking away respond with only code, then it's going to try to explain things. And if it tries to explain things and I try to execute that on Dapper or Entity Framework, it's not going to work out. So it's going to have to be only SQL code, only SQL code. So Johan here says, I mean like a SQL injection, but for the query to go outside of your set conditions. It could. That's another risk, right? This is why I say unless it has a select query, like if you see in here, I'm basically going and saying unless you have a select, do not execute because I want it to be read only, right? That just read only, right? Otherwise, anybody could just go in and try to, modify the data and stuff like that. So this is kind of my perimeter there. Yeah, that huge risk, because you're basically saying, hey, insert bunch of students in the database, right? So if I say that, it tries to translate that to SQL, it's going to detect that this is very, very poor way to kind of validate that. But again, it's a POC of going and saying, unless I don't have a select in here, or it starts with select, it should be starts with instead of contains, then do not execute that query because obviously someone's trying to inject stuff in there. But that doesn't prevent someone from basically asking a question that looks like a read, but it has a SQL injection in there. Absolutely, 100%. Another risk to be aware of. But more importantly, so we talked about three things in terms of risks, right? Like you're exposing this to AI so that your data is not private anymore. So just be aware of that part. If you could share the schema, I guess the schema might be okay, but the data itself is not in this particular POC. But more importantly, understand the risk of AI hallucinations, right? It could give you a completely crazy answer. And then the third one is basically people using AI to hack into your system and you want to make sure that even your connection string to the database or the role that you're using to access this database is read only. So even if it could bypass your code that does the validation to make sure that it's not read, it's a write kind of command, the security on the database itself will reject it. Will say you don't have permission to do any insertions or do updates or anything like that. Okay. Any more questions? All right. So just be aware of these projects that are in progress. One last thing I wanted to kind of press on, which is extremely important. Um, in order for you to be able to kind of again remember that I said it's totally okay that you're doing it through a user given that you put in the security measures, but having a system AI talk between two systems like we talked about earlier is not very far away from in the future. It's something that a lot of people are kind of working with today, and really like my advice when it comes to architecting systems that leverages AI is that you start learning about how to train an AI model, because if you can train the AI model you basically hone this power of being able to control what this model actually knows and what it doesn't versus calling a remote service or a remote RESTful API like OpenAI to kind of you have no idea. It's a black box, right? So you have no idea what's happening in that box versus having your own AI model that you can control, what data you passed in and what expectations that data is supposed to generate. It doesn't really prevent even your trained model from hallucinating, but it's a much controlled environment than just in the open web. The last thing I want to talk about is basically the ideation, right? Ideas about AI are all over the place. This is the golden age of AI because right now there's a lot of people that are thinking about all kinds of different ways of leveraging AI. One thing I want people to be aware of is the AI bias, right? It's being trained on biased data, so it might produce biased answers, right? And the only way for us to kind of mitigate that risk and be aware of that risk is to understand how these models are trained, what kind of data these models are being trained on, and start testing, these models to see, the level of risk these models are have. One of the projects that I'm thinking about, and literally inviting everyone to kind of be part of stuff like that, also in the open source space, is to basically develop an AI system that measures other AI systems. So it basically generates questions to ask other AI systems to see the level of risk there. Is it biased? Can it share harmful content? Can it share, how much often does it hallucinate? What does it do with illogical questions versus illogical answers? We need to set a standard and control this from the beginning, so people can know if I'm going to use Bard or Bing AI or OpenAI or the Llama model from Facebook or any of these models that are out there. I need to understand the level of risk that I'm working with here. So when you integrate this into your architecture, you have to make sure that your stakeholders, the business people that you're working with, and all the customers that you're working with are aware, fully aware that these are the risks that you're taking on, when you're integrating these components into your system. And then lastly, just one last note is that AI is super early stage at this moment in time. Everyone's interested in it now. Everyone is seeing, somehow all of the sudden, all the talks about, virtual reality and mixed reality and cryptocurrency and all that started to fall on the side, and everybody's looking very, very focused on AI and what AI can do. It's very early stage. So if you jump on this bandwagon from the beginning, you're gonna gain that experience that you need to be able to leverage AI into systems that you architect and systems that you develop as you go further into solving more complex problems. That's it. That's my presentation.